You're listening to Just Neighbors, where we are learning to practice biblical justice and compassion together.
Well, Dr. Kandiah, thank you so much for joining us on the Just Neighbors podcast. Personally, I've been following your work for several years now, and I just have such a great appreciation for the way that you are helping the church, people of faith, but also people in the political sphere be aware of refugees and those who have been displaced. And I am so excited to have a conversation about that today.
Thanks, Ryan. Looking forward to it.
I would love to first just hear, how did you get into the work of advocating for refugees and those who are displaced from their home?
Wow, we have to go back quite a long way to the 1990s. My wife and I were cross-cultural missionaries in Albania. And you may know Albania was one of the most closed countries in the world. It was illegal to call your son John, because that was a religious name. You weren't allowed to have a moustache. Wow. Your moustache should have been shaved off at the airport, Ryan. And then there was a bloodless revolution, and suddenly Albania was an open country. And so we went in to work with the equivalent of InterVarsity in the States. It's called the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students. And while we were there, the terrible crisis in Kosovo kicked off. And you might remember just some terrible atrocities taking place. People being, locked in a cafe, the cafe getting set fire to, and then anyone that escaped was shot. It was just the horrible ethnic cleansing that was going on. And Clinton and Blair were our kind of leaders at the time. And they did something very brave, and they kind of intervened and stopped some of the worst of the violence. But during that time, a lot of refugees left Kosovo and came to Albania. And Albania at that time was the poorest country in Europe, and yet people were incredibly hospitable. In fact, the Kosovans had a more developed country, and they were coming into Albania, and they couldn't believe the poverty, but they couldn't believe the generosity as well. And for me, that really set a high bar of what was possible. And so when my wife and I returned to the UK, we'd kind of handed over the student movement to Albanian leadership, and that was really exciting. So it was time for us to get out of the way and let those guys lead. And then I was kind of studying for a master's in missiology. And while we were in the UK, I remember I was walking to the church I'd started to work for one Sunday morning, and I heard a language I recognised, and I couldn't see anyone. Then I looked in a garden, and there were these two guys. They were quite well dressed, but they were doing gardening. They were tidying up the gardening, putting in some paving stones, and they were speaking Albanian. And we'd learnt a bit of the language while we were there, so I just said, "Shkemi si yeni si kalon." And they nearly jumped out of their skin, because they'd never met anyone in the UK that spoke Albanian, and they'd never met a brown person. I mean, I'm Indian, Malaysian, Sri Lankan. I'm a real mix, but no Albanian. They just couldn't believe it. They thought they'd seen a ghost or something. Anyway, we got chatting, and it turns out they were Kosovan refugees that were in the UK, and they felt like they didn't belong anywhere. They were too white for the local mosque, which was mainly kind of Pakistanis and other Asians. And they weren't Christian, and they weren't secular, so they didn't really know where to fit in. So we ended up putting on a special... I said, what do you guys need? And they said, well, our kids don't know their own mother tongue. Could we do a language school? And I said, yeah, sure. So we opened up our church for a language school on a Saturday morning, and just offered, teas and coffees and all sort of support that we could. And I said, is there anything else we could do? I said, well, we love our poetry and our music. There's no context for our poetry and music. I said, I'll tell you what, why don't we have a festival, a Kosovan and Albanian music and language and dance festival. So we threw it in our local church. And about 150 Kosovans came along. It was a tiny little church. The congregation of the church was only 150 people, but there were 150 Kosovans that came. And it was just mad dancing. It was just so much fun and excitement. People were getting really sweaty, so all the condensation was coming on the windows. And then I stood in the lobby area, and this guy comes out and he says, Mr. Krish, I don't understand. my understanding of the Christian faith is that you guys tried to ethnically cleanse all of my family. On the side of the wall, where, you know, in the room where we're dancing, it says, Jesus Christ is Lord. What's that about? And I thought, what an opportunity. You know, this person, there used to be something called the Engels scale, which showed how far away people were from, you know, becoming Christians. And, you know, -5 was you'd had a bad experience in Sunday school or something, and that had put you off. Or, you know, these guys were like -1,000,000. Christians were the people that tried to kill them, but through hospitality, were able to offer something very different. So for me, that was the beginning of my journey to get involved with refugee resettlement.
That's incredible. I love the hospitality aspect of you guys were in the church having a great time, and in that relational setting where people are enjoying each other, they see Jesus as Lord. What would have happened if their experience in the church was much different, right? Was not healthy, not good, and then they see Jesus as Lord? I mean, that could have totally derailed everything.
You're so right, Jamie. I mean, the verse that comes to mind is from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, let your light shine before people that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. I mean, my PhD was on evangelism and apologetics and epistemology, and I kind of got into a world where we thought the best way to persuade people of the gospel was just through pure rational argument. But that's not what the scripture actually says. Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works. It's not enough just for us to speak the gospel. We've got to live the gospel. And Jesus is the perfect embodiment of that. He doesn't just bring words, and he doesn't just bring actions.
Yes.
You know, words without actions lack credibility. Actions without words lack intelligibility. So you need both together. And I don't know, when I was a kind of young Christian, the kind of in vogue quote was ostensibly from St. Francis of Assisi: preach the gospel, use words if necessary. And I've asked some Assisi scholars, and no one can find anywhere where he actually said that, so it's an apocryphal quote. But I think, you know, if anyone could have preached the gospel without using words, you'd have thought Jesus would have pulled it off, but he didn't. And if anyone could have preached the gospel just using words, you think Jesus would have done it, but he joins together word and deed, and that's the job of the church. And that's why, for me, how we respond to those who are marginalized, outcast, the refugee, the vulnerable child. I've had a lot of work in helping with children in the care system, just like some of you guys. This is, it's good for the people we're serving and helping. That's the reason one. But it's also good for our offering of worship to God.
Amen.
And it's good for the public witness of what does the gospel actually do? How is it good news? What does it feel like to be on the receiving end of the love of God? And that's our little space.
Beautiful. I love that question too. What do you need? I mean, development starts there, doesn't it? Not where we project what we think people need, but we start with what do you need? And that led to this beautiful moment that came from the very people you were intending to serve. Maybe take us to the next iteration in your story. So you have this beautiful moment, and then where do you go from here in your work with people who are displaced?
Well, that experience with the Kosovans in our community made us ask, well, who else in our community feels like they don't quite fit in and don't quite belong? And it turned out there were a lot of Afghan people in our community. There were people who were East Africans, but of Asian background. So, you know, often Punjabi people that had come from India, they'd gone to Kenya and Tanzania. And then a lot of their families had left during kind of Idi Amin's difficult time in that country and the persecution they faced, and they'd come to the UK. And then just anyone who had recently arrived was struggling to integrate. So we did some research, and we tried to find out, is there anything that everybody likes? And we were surprised. I shouldn't be because of the geography of it, but Bollywood was a big deal, right? Bollywood. I thought, look, I love movies. I'm not a massive Bollywood fan, but I'll run with this and see if we could do something. So I had a pretty kind of white church. It was quite monocultural, but in a really multicultural area. So we're looking for some bridges that we could find into that community. So we tried to put on a Bollywood night, And
Yes.
we thought, what food do you put on? We'll do vegetarian food because no one's going to be offended. It doesn't have to be halal or kosher or beef or no beef. Vegetarian, everyone can work on. And I tried to find Christians that were into Bollywood, that could play some Bollywood music. I couldn't find anyone. So how about this? The closest I could find was a Asian Elvis impersonator.
Yes. This is
So I booked him
fantastic.
because he's all I could find, right? And I booked a Bollywood dance band as well locally, but you know,
Wow.
this Asian Elvis impersonator, he turns up in a Mercedes with a driver, and I go out to greet him, and he wouldn't even shake my hand because he's this kind
Wow.
of megastar. It was
Wow.
great.
Goodness,
But our local church got really involved. They hosted it, you know, backed it financially. We had about 300 people come, and again, we're a tiny church, right? 150 when everybody's there, and with all their aunties and uncles and grandchildren and animals. That's us, 150. That's Sunday of the year, and we had 300 people come from the community, and you know, the Elvis impersonator was terrible. But the Bollywood dance band were great. Lots of our congregation talked to their Asian neighbours and said, "Look, I want to honour your culture. We're having this Bollywood event. Is it okay to wear a sari? How do you wear a sari?" And you
Wow.
know, they were just trying to connect with the
Yes.
culture. It was a beautiful moment. Anyway, the favourite
Wow.
bit for me, I gave a talk about one particular Bollywood movie which has got this really powerful picture of someone sacrificing their life to save a friend. I said, "Look, there's a hint here of something that's important to me and my faith and the Christian gospel." And you know, it wasn't a heavy push. It was just a, hey, there's bridges between what the Christian message has to say and what some of the really powerful Bollywood themes are. But my favourite line was in the local newspaper that week, and it said, "Church brings races together."
Wow.
I thought I would pay money for advertising.
Wow.
What do I want people to say about the church? The church is a place
Yes.
where whoever you are, wherever you're from, whatever your
Yep.
background, whether you're a new arrival, a refugee, or a resident, you belong. And so
Amen.
for
Yes.
that to be in the local newspaper, where
Wow.
someone had come and seen just this range of different people from all sorts of different places, I thought there's something powerful about the corporate witness of the church to a community. And that wasn't a
Yes.
Christian newspaper, that was a secular local newspaper. And you think, oh, this is what we want. This is going
Wow.
to commend Jesus, the Prince of Peace. What a fantastic way of doing very, very hospitable, compassionate Christian evangelism.
You've mentioned belonging and just this word belong. And would you say this is one of the greatest felt needs of the refugee, of the displaced, or would you even say others?
Oh, there are a whole bunch of things that displaced people are feeling, and definitely isolation is one of them. I mean, they're not alone in that.
Yeah,
A lot of surveys of our wider nation is
for sure.
isolation and loneliness is one of the big pandemic issues. You know,
Yes.
not just because of the pandemic that we've all been through, but before it's
Correct.
such a massive mental health, physical health implications issue. So, you know, that the fact that we can say there are lots of people in this community that feel like that, and we'd love for you to come and help us. You know, we'd like
Yes.
to do this together. So there's nearly 100 million displaced people in the world. Some of those people are what we call internally displaced people. They're people that have moved from one side of the country to another. So, for example, do a lot of work with Ukraine, and some people have moved away from where the frontline fighting is, and
Yeah.
they've been displaced to another part of Ukraine. Some people I've met that were displaced internally. Then, when the fighting spread, there was nowhere safe for them to go, so they became externally displaced. They crossed another kind of border between countries, and that's when you become a refugee, when you're seeking refuge in another country. And the other kind of group of people to talk about are asylum seekers. So in European and UK law, an asylum seeker is someone who is looking to find refuge in another country, and the country is weighing up their claim for asylum. And if they're granted asylum, then they become legally a refugee in your country. So some of the terms are overlapping, but
That's helpful.
I would say most displaced people, they have real challenges because they've had trauma in leaving the people and the places that they love and they grew up with. A friend of mine is an Iranian refugee, and she just says, you know, I can't even talk about home to people. It's such a triggering word for me. I can't even begin to talk about it. And you know, home is not just a physical place. It's the smell of my grandmother's cooking. It's you know, being teased by the boys at the end of the road. It's places that I know the names of, places I could walk around with my eyes closed. It's where I belong. And so being displaced, you lose all of that. And then you've got kind of a other bunch of issues in that you're trying to figure out, well, who am I in this new place? Am I the refugee? And if I'm the refugee, sometimes that comes with a lot of baggage. Sometimes the culture is quite hostile to me. Sometimes the political rhetoric is quite hostile to me. I'm depersonalized. In Britain and sadly in America too, we often talk about a flood of migrants or an invasion, and these are really sometimes militaristic but often dehumanizing phrases. And so you're dealing with who you are. You've also not just lost family and friends and places that you considered normal to you, you've often lost a skill set. So, you know, when we went from the UK to Albania, I felt very de-skilled. I'm a public speaker. That's what I do for a job. I've got to learn a language, and that's really hard. And suddenly I sound worse than a 4-year-old child in the culture. So I feel de-skilled. Well, imagine that a million times more when, you know, you didn't come because you chose to or you're on holiday. You've come because you had absolutely no choice. And you might have had a significant job, loads of qualifications, and they often count for nothing in the new culture. So there's a whole lot of issues around identity loss, which brings some mental health issues. This whole trauma thing is that a lot of people have had no control over their lives. They've made no decisions. They didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay. They didn't choose where they ended up. They've kind of been dragged or pushed somewhere else. And now here they are. What can they do? They've lost all their sense of agency. So there's layer upon layer of loss. And I think one of the big things that we can do is, as you were saying, Ryan, is just come alongside people and say, well, you know, I'm here. I recognise this is my place. I'm at home here, and I know it must be sometimes difficult for you. What is it that we can do? How can we be of service to you? What can we do to help you feel at home here? Feel like this is your place. Feel that you can belong here. How can we be of service to you? And I think that posture can be such a breath of fresh air for our friends that have arrived from difficult places.
Yeah, that language really matters. How we talk about people informs how we think about them. And so paying attention to political rhetoric and even in our own hearts, not to other people. Oh, there's the refugee over there. And as you and I know, and you've written about extensively, Krish, is that the people of God are refugees. We're sojourners in our very DNA. Our redemption story is we were a people delivered from oppression and wandering. And I've loved how you've written so well about those themes in a lot of your writings. Maybe talk us through, what are some of the things you've done to care for displaced people in line with what you're saying? Like, yes, this is right. This was a good result. And then one of our values at Just Neighbors is everybody's a learner. Everyone makes mistakes. We're all on a journey. So maybe share a story or a moment, or maybe you weren't living into being a just neighbor in the way that you had hoped.
Oh, Ryan, how long have you got for the failure piece? As you asked, I'll start with something that I've just been so blessed to play a part in, and just still seeing the kind of ongoing positive ramifications of what's happening. And the Ukraine war is kind of the most recent one, I guess. So you remember on the 24th of February 2022, Russia illegally invades Ukraine. It's a full-scale invasion. I spoke to a 12-year-old girl with her auntie who are here in the British Isles, and, you know, just woken up at 4:00 in the morning, hearing a crash, thinking it was a car or, you know, some kind of accident. And then they hit the air raid sirens, and you know, these were not normal noises in Ukraine, and it just it's such a frightening howl, isn't it? And suddenly they've gone from just, you know, a little girl staying with her granny for a time to suddenly I need to get out of this country, and how am I going to do it? It's just unbelievable. I really would encourage any of your listeners to read the biographies that refugees are writing about their stories. That's one of the really powerful ways we can make space to hear their voices. So I saw that the countries around Ukraine, places like Romania and Poland and a tiny little country called Moldova, were being incredibly generous and just opening their borders to welcome Ukrainians in so they could get away from the bombing and the fighting. And I went to visit Moldova just to see, how is this possible? It's a tiny, tiny country, smaller than, a US city, and yet opening its borders to hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. And they were welcoming people into their homes, literally into their houses. It was incredible. And our government said it was planning to do something, maybe some kind of uncapped sponsorship program. And uncapped is good because it sounded like there was no upper limit. Sponsorship was a problem, though, because I've been involved in Syrian refugee sponsorship, and that community sponsorship program is wonderful, but quite bureaucratic, quite clunky. It often takes a year or 18 months to get one of those programs going. So, oh man, that's too late, right?
Yeah.
But just the public imagination would move. We need to do something else.
Yes.
And our government at the time wasn't one that responded well to critique. If you went in there with a kind of, what are you doing? How could you be so heartless? The shields tend to go up. And I thought, okay, what could we do to encourage the government that they said they'll do something, and maybe we could help them with it. So what I did with some friends is we set up a website and gave it a name, Sanctuary Foundation. It later became a charity. And we got people to pledge that if there was a government scheme available, you would welcome a Ukrainian. We thought it would be likely to be a mother and some children into your home as guests for as long as they needed it. If you would be up for that, then just let us know. And we had 100 people reply in about an hour. I said, yeah, count me in, I'm in. And by the next day, it was about 1,000. And by the next day, it was about 2,000. And then I get a call from the BBC, and it's the breakfast show, which is like kind of Good Morning America, but without the glitz. Like, I've visited Good Morning America in the audience once to see a friend of mine. And man, you guys do things at another level, right? So ours is a little bit more... just a cup of tea on British television. Anyway, so they invited me on, and I got 5 minutes. I brought a friend of mine who'd been hosting unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and refugees for a number of years. And so we made our pitch to the nation, and I knew we were onto something because the floor manager, so the lady that had shown us where to sit and where the camera was going to be and where make sure we didn't trip over any wires. At the end of we only had like a 5-minute slot. And at the end, she said, look, I've got my phone out and I've gone onto your website and I've registered. And I've also started Googling Ukrainian recipes. Because when my refugee family come to stay with me, I want to be able to cook them something so they feel at home.
Oh, my goodness.
And I thought, this is it, isn't it? Like that, there is a hospitable, empathetic public out there. If you give them an opportunity to respond to something that's in the public eye, and boy, the Ukraine war was in the public eye all the time. For a window, it was all that you could read. And everyone's going, I want to do something, I want to do something. And if you give someone a practical, tangible thing that they can do, then they'll respond. So 29,000 people responded. And then we go to the government and say, look, we've got all these offers from civil society. Some of these are churches and some of these are businesses and just ordinary households. Here we are. Can we help you do that thing that you said you want to do, an uncapped sponsorship program? Can't we do it? And to their credit,
amazing,
the government let us in, and not just us, other charities too. And we co-designed what became the Homes for Ukraine program. And now in the UK, 200,000 Ukrainians have been hosted. Most of them have come, I think it's about 160,000 have come through this scheme where you can open your home and you can welcome a Ukrainian mother and children into your home. And the other, maybe 40,000 have come from Ukrainian families that were here already that have been able to sponsor their relatives. So, and it's been phenomenal. We just did a poll of about 1,000 of the hosts. And all of them are saying, it's been great, right? We've loved it. It's been a privilege. We would do this for other people. About half would do it again for other people. And the Ukrainians, how about this? We asked them, how welcome have you felt in the UK? and 90% have given us 9 or 10 out of 10.
Wow.
Right? I don't give people 10
That's
out of 10 when I
amazing.
go to an Airbnb, right? Imagine you have to share your kitchen, and you got to figure out when
Wow.
your kids go to bed and their kids go to bed, and you just like plonk together. Most people were strangers before. We have unlocked something of incredible power. And to be fair, the Americans are taking it back, and you've innovated on that, and you've offered it to Ukrainians and people from South America. So, there's been this wave of compassion, we've been calling it. We've been part of it. You guys in America have been part of it. And it's just a completely different narrative to the one that says, we're full, we don't want
Yes.
any more newcomers here.
Yeah.
There's no room. All these people are just going to come and steal our jobs or throw over our culture. It's a different approach that says, you know what, we've got so much. Why wouldn't we share that with other people?
Yes.
And the feeling it's actually been it's been tough, but it's been a privilege. It's been wonderful.
Hey neighbors, I hope you are loving this conversation. As we continue to learn more about practicing biblical justice and compassion together, I want to invite you into an opportunity where you can lead others to become just neighbors in your community. At the Forgotten Initiative, we exist to help churches support foster care agencies. Foster care agency workers serve on the front lines of a complex and challenging system created to protect children and support families in crisis. They are the hub of the entire system, reaching every other member of the foster care community, but they are struggling. National worker tenure is only 2.5 years and has a significant and devastating impact on children. It contributes to increased time in foster care, higher risk of placement disruptions, and triggers feelings of being abandoned, unwanted, and forgotten. Local churches are uniquely positioned and equipped to walk with these workers. However, agencies and churches are often disconnected from one another. We want to train you how to connect them. You can bridge the gap by becoming a TFI advocate. We only open applications for our advocate program a few times a year, and June is one of these months. I invite you to learn more and apply at tfiadvocate.org. You can truly make a difference in the lives of those experiencing foster care right where you live, and we are here to help you every step of the way. Apply before June ends at tfiadvocate.org. I'm just inspired. I just keep thinking this is the definition of a just neighbor, right?
Yeah,
You're opening the door, biblical hospitality. It's just awesome.
It's been encouraging. And to be fair, the church from every denomination you could imagine has got involved. I thought it might just be the kind of justice warriors who kind of, they're all about justice on their website, justice in their singing. But it's been people that kind of the other end of the spectrum that don't normally talk about justice, because hospitality, I found, cuts through. It doesn't belong to a tribe. If you're Christian, you've got to take hospitality seriously. Most people, most Christians that know a bit of their Bible would go, oh yeah, wasn't there something about entertaining strangers without knowing it? It's like, sure, I'm supposed to do that. Or pushed hard enough, the most challenging parable Jesus ever told was a parable of the sheep and the goats. And that's a salvation parable. That's, are you in the kingdom? Like, this is punishment or heaven. It's about as full on as you can get, and avoided by many Christians because it's as full on as you can get. But what's the litmus test that you're in the kingdom?
Yep.
I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me in. It's just there, not as a bolt-on for a certain breed of Christian wired a certain way. This is essential Christian discipleship. I'm not even calling it radical hospitality. It's just normal Christian hospitality.
Right.
And we've seen some of that. I wish I could tell you every Christian in the country is like, no, but a lot from a whole range of different backgrounds have, and it's been just great to see.
Yeah. You almost introduced a formula in this public imagination plus opportunity to do something small equals wave of compassion.
Yeah.
And I love
like
that
that
thinking. I love that thinking that this is what I've already observed about you. You're so good at is like you're sensing the culture, you're prophetically listening to what people care about, and then you're pushing in to offer opportunities for people to get involved. The genius of the UK situation was the government had already said they wanted to do something. And so you're helping the government meet their goals, not trying to convince them that they should meet your goals. And I wonder if we had that framework more often of public imagination plus opportunity to serve, moving for that wave of compassion, and particularly looking for the gaps of the things. What is my, and government, could be city government. It could be a school board. National politics has kind of swallowed up the word government and politics, but we kind of got to take it back to the local level, because there's so many smaller, more manageable situations that you can change. You can bring massive change. Not everyone's a Dr. Krish Kandiah, and on a national level, they're going to help see 200,000 people hosted. That is so beautiful. But all of us can see little injustices in our neighborhoods, in our schools, in our cities, and we can take this formula to try to affect change.
You've captured something really important there. And sometimes it happens because it's in the news. So we saw that happen with Afghan refugees, when both of our nations pulled out of Afghanistan at very short notice. The whole country collapses into Taliban rule. And then we saw those pictures, didn't we, from Kabul airport, people hanging onto the outside of transporter planes, stuffed in the middle of cargo bays, families throwing their babies to American soldiers to escape. It was awful. And again, there was a wave of empathy. People wanted to do something. And so we were able to, help harness that for about 25,000 Afghan refugees that got stuck into hotels. So sometimes it's the media presents the opportunity, and if we're quick and clear, and we've cultivated the trusted relationships with those in power, that we're not going to just Bible bash them and tell people that they need to repent, but we're actually going to offer. We call it faith-based, but not faith-biased, kindness and compassion. We're here to serve. So that can be really powerful. But the other way, as you say, is there are huge holes in government, whether that's local government or national government. And one that you and I know a lot about is the whole foster care system. That's where I learned a lot of this, is working with, maybe it's a city council that's short of foster carers. Well, churches are full of people that are commanded to care for the widow and the orphan and the stranger. Surely we must be able to do something. So it's not just limited to refugees. I've seen churches around the UK do this around poverty alleviation, food banks, job creation. There's areas of overlapping interest, whether that's a right-leaning government or a left-leaning government. Who cares, right? We're going to just find overlapping ambition. And some people go, oh, how can you work with a government that you don't agree with? I'm going, well, think of Daniel. I'm pretty sure if there was an open election and it was Nebuchadnezzar versus any other leader on the planet, Daniel would not have voted for Nebuchadnezzar. He was not a Bible-believing Christian. He didn't toe the line on all our hot-button issues. In fact, if you disagreed with King Nebuchadnezzar, he tended to throw you in a fiery furnace and set fire to you, right? So this is not a open government that you're going to have a lot of shared ground. And yet, Daniel, in his court, is looking for a way to be a blessing. And he finds it. Same with Joseph, with Pharaoh, right? Do they have a lot in common in their kind of worldview and beliefs about the universe? No, they don't. But because Joseph was put where he was able to save the Israelites from starvation, amen. But he also saved Egypt from starvation too. There's a way that you can seek the common good and bless, even if you don't agree with your government. You can find some common ground. And I think that's important for us Christians, because we can be so partisan that it's my party, or I'm doing nothing, or I'm just going to oppose, or I might even go and try and invade a government building and take over the nation back again. I'm going, there are other ways we can behave, that we can be the best citizens, that we're going to do what Jeremiah 29 told us, to seek the welfare of the city that I've sent you to. And wherever we are, we can be a blessing, and we can stand up for the vulnerable and the displaced.
You're
Beautiful.
speaking my language. Krish, we hadn't talked about this before, but that is what we do at the Forgotten Initiative is
Oh, wow.
we are coming alongside foster care agencies and hearing, learning. I mean, so much of what you've done is, we're training advocates who are helping churches support the agency and the workers because they're the people so embedded in the foster care community. But it's just everything you're saying about working with government is just like, I'm just cheering because it's so true. You don't have to agree, but you do need to walk in, and you both have the same, same goal for these kids. That
Exactly.
you want them to be safe
Yep.
and find permanency. And so you can find common ground
Yes.
through that.
I totally agree with Jamie, and I think this posture is a really powerful one for helping to share what's important to us. Like the reason I do what I do is because I love God, right? That's the driver, and we've got two commands: love God, love your neighbor, and as I try to come alongside the business leader, the government leader, the local authority, the social worker, we're finding a way to partner together for the common good. And as we do that, good things happen.
Yeah.
Have you got time for a quick story? I've got a funny story.
Yes.
You bet we do.
So I used to live in Harrow, which is a really funny place in England. It's on the outskirts of London. And our house, I was a pastor, so our house was not in a very salubrious area. And in fact, outside our house were 4 lanes of traffic, right, before we could go and see the house on the other side of this this kind of motorway. So we only got to know our neighbours on our left and our right because we just couldn't cross the road very easily. And I went to visit the neighbour on the left of our house, and I knocked on the door, and I was brand new, right? We'd literally moved in. We had 2 tiny children and 1 on the way. And I said, hello, I'm Krish, I'm from next door. He said, yeah, what do you want? I said, I thought I'd just come and say hello. Hello. I said, can I invite you for a coffee? I've got coffee here, why do I need your coffee? I thought, well, maybe we could talk about something. Well, I don't know you, what have we got to talk about? So I completely failed to engage my neighbour. And I'm supposed to be the pastor, I'm supposed to be good at talking to people, but he has no interest in getting to know me at all. I was not doing a good job of loving my neighbour. And then I bought a really old car. Well, I think you call them beaters in America, is that right? A
Yeah,
beat-up old
yeah.
car. It was so bad that, I bought it because I was such a silly man. It had V6 on it, so it had a really chunky engine, and I hadn't really read anything else. V6, you had me, right? So one day, this V6 car, the engine starts just belching out loads of smoke. And so I popped the hood. Is that right? No, the bonnet. What do you guys call it? I always
The
get
hood, you
the
got
hood.
it.
Okay, pop the hood. We call it a bonnet, which I think you call a hat. Anyway,
Yeah.
I popped the hood, and it's smoke everywhere. And I've got a spanner, and I don't know the first thing about engine repair, but I'm just like a man of faith, prodding into the darkness and the fumes with my spanner. Anyway, quick as a flash, my neighbour, who doesn't want to have coffee with me, he comes out of his house and he's grabbed his toolbox out of his van, and suddenly it's him and me trying to fix his car together. And then, thank you so much. That's really kind of you. Right? How's your family? Oh, family's all right. Actually, I see you've got a new one. Yeah, it's all going. Anyway, so we couldn't have a face-to-face relationship because we had so little in common. And I was a pastor. He was an electrical installer. He couldn't see anything that we could. Why would I want to know you? But give us a common task together, shoulder to shoulder. We had a whole different level of relationship. And it's only partly a joke. Every time I needed to talk to him, I'd just pop the hood of my car and
come running.
But I think there's a metaphor there for our culture. We can go face to face. Like, I believe this, well, you believe this, and you're pro-women, well, you're anti-women, you're pro-gay, you're anti-gay. And you're just in that fighting as you stare each other in the face. Well, if you could say, hang on, there are some things that we all agree on needs to get better in our world, whether that's vulnerable children, whether that's, racial disparity, whether it's how we welcome refugees, and, pick the issue, you will find common cause and you will have a whole nother level of conversation while you're doing some good in the world. And you think, okay, the worst thing that's happened here is some good has happened in the world. And the best thing that's happened here is some good has happened in the world, and maybe someone's come to a different understanding of who we follow and why we follow it. So I think you're onto something, both of you. And, all power to you as you attempt to, come to serve. There's such a powerful moment for us.
How do you see us? One thing we haven't talked about yet that I'd love to hear from you is just the Hamas-Israel conflict that's going on right now. I know you're involved, and even today, you're working to get children out of that very desperate situation. How do you see us working side by side? Maybe just talk about what's going on, what you're seeing, what you're hearing. It also ties back to your comment about agreeing with your government, and there's a lot of frustration on the U.S. side about how we are or are not approaching things. A lot of people with a lot of passion. I think we have a public imagination moment, as you call it. How do we come side by side as neighbors, regardless if we're on the right or the left, and we kind of move towards compassion and relief in this really horrific situation?
Oh, Ryan, this is such a big challenge, and I wish I could tell you I've got a really good solution. With the Ukraine invasion, it was so clear to everybody, that Ukraine were the innocent party, Russia unprovoked attack, in they went. And so the whole world, it feels, well, nearly the whole world, just came alongside Ukraine with such compassion, and everyone wants to put a flag on their house. And, every single bit, everyone I ever asked to do anything to help on Ukraine was, oh my goodness, please, can I do more? How can I do more? With Israel and Gaza, it's almost the complete opposite.
Wow.
It's become so politicized, so there's so much information and disinformation that it's really difficult for anyone to say the most basic of things. I mean, I don't think it's that hard, but it's still become that hard. So look, I abhor the attack. That attack on the 7th of October of Hamas was so brutal, so disgusting. It was so horrible. It's inexcusable, right? Like there's no justification for it.
Yes.
And so you don't have to pick a side, right? We are for everybody. We love everybody because everybody is made in the image of God. What does the Bible say? The most famous verse in the world: for God so loved Israel. No. For God so loved Gaza. No. For God so loved the world, right?
Yes.
Every single person on this planet is loved by God. And so somehow we Christians have to show that love.
Yeah.
Now, I've really struggled with this because when I try to help people from Gaza, it's often Christians that are telling me, everyone in Gaza is a terrorist. I'm going, well, what about a 5-year-old child? Some Christians will tell me, no, they'll just grow up to be terrorists. Now, I say, do you remember in Uganda, about 15, 20 years ago maybe, there was a group called the Lord's Resistance Army. There was a big campaign, started in the States actually, called the Stop Coney campaign, if you remember it.
Yeah.
And we recognised that there were these terrible crimes being committed against children, that Joseph Coney deliberately, kidnapped, drugged small children, 11, 12, 13. And yet we thought that with the right love and support and care, children that have been, abused like that could be rehabilitated and be given another life, because we believe in the redemptive power of God, right? Not in a romantic way that says just pray a few prayers and Despicable Me bedtime stories and it all goes away. You and I, we're in the foster and adoption world. We know it's not like that, but still, there were enough people that thought we could do something to help these children in Uganda. But for the Palestinian children, there isn't that imagination. They're just written off as being somehow subhuman. And this has huge consequences for how the Christian message is perceived in that whole region.
Yeah.
Right? There are neighbouring countries. There are Muslim countries. I've just came back from Malaysia. It's not directly involved in the conflict at all, but it's a majority Muslim country. They see what we in the West are doing with unequivocally supporting Israel, and they think, if that's Christianity, I want nothing to do with it. We're back to that Kosovo situation.
Yeah.
You Christians, you're the ones that are trying to exterminate and ethnically cleanse us. I'm going, that wasn't us, right? That was someone that had abused Christianity. Christianity says, love your enemy, love your neighbour. There's no one left on the planet if you love your enemies and you love your neighbours. That's everybody, right? So this is such a big issue. And I think I'm really scared that too often Christians are the wrong side of it. We've become politically captive to a certain ideology. and it's actually preventing us from hearing the call of the gospel to love everybody. It's a little bit, oh my goodness, I'm going to get very controversial now. It's a little bit like those that are in the Ku Klux Klan, right? Their Christianity told them that they needed to protect their nation from these black people. Now, thank God, we've woken up to the evil that was, and that wasn't Christianity. That was a form of racist ideology that had pretended to be Christianity.
Yes.
Now, if we're not careful, the way that we're speaking of Palestinians can be the same.
Yeah.
And, maybe in years to come, we'll look back and go, how could we be so captive to a fake ideology? Of course, we love the people of Israel. God loves the people of Israel.
Yes.
But he also loves the nations. That's how all of us that are not Jewish get to be in the kingdom.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yeah. Wow.
Whew, that's powerful.
Thank you for sharing and giving us just a glimpse that is so helpful to be reminded of the humanity of the situation, to take it out of the political sphere, the philosophical conversations, and just to bring it back to actual people that are hurting and suffering. Maybe just what would you say to the pastor, the Christian, the follower of Jesus? What are small things that we can do? And I think you've already mentioned one earlier, is just monitoring our language and how we talk about people and how we talk about the other, making sure that they're included in the Imago Dei, the image of God, fellow humans. Maybe just for people who are feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of this situation, what would you say to them?
Oh man, there's so many things to do, but I don't want to overwhelm you. I think the key thing for me, I call it the power of proximity. How can you get closer to people that are affected by this? Are there people in your community who have loved ones in Gaza? That's their kind of ethnic background. Is there any way you can approach them? It could be Jewish people in your community that are feeling like the culture's become more anti-Semitic. How can I get closer to you so that I can understand you better, I can listen better, I can serve you better? We found that with Ukrainians. Opening your home gets you very close to people that are in need.
Yep.
And it's actually incredibly energizing. I find this with the work I'm trying to do in changing child welfare systems. The thing that really keeps me going is every dinner time that I have, there are 6 children around my table and 3 of them had a care history, and I can see they're flourishing because they're in a loving, stable family. It's definitely up and down, and there are difficult things every day, but I can see, over time, things are getting better for them. And that makes me think, man, this must be possible for other people, right?
Yeah.
And so I would say lean in where you can to people in need. It doesn't have to be around fostering or adoption or Israel or Gaza or refugees. There are poor people, there are lonely people, that if you can get close to them, suddenly this is where the love your neighbor, love God thing becomes a really virtuous circle, because as you show love for your neighbor, you realize, I need love from God to kind of pass on to others, and then you pass it on, and then you want more from God, and it just begins to snowball. It's beautiful. So lean in somewhere. If you're really a shy person, I bet there are even people in your own family that are feeling isolated and feeling lonely. What is it you could do for them? Start wherever you think it's appropriate. I think that would be probably the biggest thing.
Well, Krish, thank you so much for joining us and helping us just think about how we can become just neighbors who pursue justice and righteousness. We're all on a journey. Most of us start out as, I'm just a neighbor. I'm just someone who lives next door. I don't have that proximity you talked about, but I am so thankful for your wisdom, your work, your insight, and how we can be in Christ and grow in becoming a just neighbor to those who are hurting and need to encounter the love of God. So thanks for jumping on with us.
Yeah.
My pleasure. And anything I can do to support you guys, let me know. For those listeners that want to stay in touch, I'm pretty addicted to social media. So I'm on X, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. And if people want to reach out, happy to chat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Just Neighbors is a resource of the Forgotten Initiative, a Christ-centered nonprofit ministry that exists to help churches support foster care agencies across America. TFI is funded by listeners like you and other faithful ministry partners who have received value from our work and want to help us expand our efforts across the nation. We are grateful for the opportunity to serve you and your church with resources that bring understanding for the people of foster care and provide you with gospel-centered encouragement to depend on Jesus as you serve. I invite you to join us today with a gift of any amount at theforgotteninitiative.org/give. Let's do this together.